Okay, I can do this without being ranty. It's just that one book's better than the other one. You know what? I decided I'm going to stop doing intros because they are so awkward for me. Like, it is so difficult starting a conversation with a camera. So I'm just skipping it. Today is a long time coming. I have been saying for a while that I wanted to do a video comparing Red Rising by Pierce Brown to The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins because people seem to think that they have a lot in common and I do not. So here we go. First of all, let me say I am biased. Red Rising is one of my favorite books of all time. When I first heard that people were comparing Red Rising to Hunger Games, I was personally offended because I think that's such a microscopic comparison. Like, what they're focusing on when they say that is such a small part of the story, and it's kind of one of the only things that there is. But I get that that is a very specific thing that people are talking about. Anyways, I hadn't read Hunger Games yet when I was getting all worked up over this, so I listened to the audiobook a couple months ago, and now I'm just going to break it down. So to summarize, The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins is about 385 pages, the first book, and it obviously has been made into a movie. It's very, very popular. This is a YA dystopian book. Therein lies the first massive difference. Red Rising by Pierce Brown is... how many pages is this bad boy? About 400 pages, and it is an adult space opera. Vastly different worlds, people. So that is major difference number one. Well, two, I guess. YA versus adult, and dystopian versus like massive, very complicated space opera. I kind of jotted down a few categories to compare these two in, and I'm just gonna go for it. So first off, I want to talk about our protagonist. Katniss in The Hunger Games is a young woman who is very stubborn, she's very determined, she's very protective and loyal. She's very pragmatic because she's had to be. She's always had a lot of responsibility, and she's a badass female lead character. I really like Katniss after reading the books and after getting to hear her inner thoughts. People had told me that that was kind of the main reason to read The Hunger Games versus watching it, is that you appreciate her a lot more, and that's very, very true. I really, really like Katniss in the book. She's fine in the movies, but in the book, I really like her. Darrow is... they're both naive in different ways is the thing. Like, Katniss is naive in different ways from Darrow. I would say Darrow is kind of more all-around naive in the sense that he's totally caught up in how his world works, and he's good just going with that, and he has romanticized things a lot and kind of built things up to be bigger than what they are in his head because that's what he had to build up. That does change with his character arc for sure, but in the first book, that's what he's transitioning from. I think maybe some of that has to do with Katniss is a woman. Like, sorry, it has to be said. It just has to be said. The other thing is both Darrow and Katniss lose a key person in their lives at a young age, but they lose them at different parts of the story and in different ways. So that seems to affect things pretty decently as well. And while I am going to focus on comparing the first book of each series and how the characters are in those books, I'm going to cheat for a second and just say that I do feel like Darrow has a lot more evolution throughout the books, a lot more. And part of that is the Red Rising series, and that whole saga covers more time than the Hunger Games, but part of it is, I don't think it's exactly fair to say that Red Rising, everything that happens is more dramatic, but it kind of is. Like, everything's just on a bigger scale and more complex. I probably at some point will read the second and third Hunger Games book just to see the evolution of Katniss's inner dialogue to compare that to Darrow, but in the first book alone, I feel like Darrow changes more than Katniss does, just in the first book. I would say Katniss is probably considered to be the grumpier character of the two, but we all know that a man and a woman could act exactly the same, and the woman would be considered the grumpy one. So there's that. I want to acknowledge that. But she also just is, like, she's dug down into the responsibility side of things so intensely that it's hard for her to let go of that, and I honestly love that about her. I think she's very relatable in the sense that she's so focused on sifting through the bullshit, that she doesn't have time to be this like high school girl having fun and just lollygagging around. Like, she has real problems that she has to deal with every day, and she's focused on that. So when I say she's the grumpier character, that's not a bad thing. I actually love that about her. I think Darrow is not as good at letting go of how he wants things to be and letting go of how he thought things were. While I think he does evolve more throughout the series and just in the first book, I think he has a harder time of it. Like, Katniss has been adaptable for a while now, and it's a skill of hers. They're interesting people to compare, and I love both of them. I honestly, both of these characters are really, really well done. Side characters. This is probably going to be the one that irritates some people. I am super confused by how Suzanne Collins wrote such an overall good book and wrote her side characters so terribly. And it takes a lot for me to say that so bluntly and in a way that sounds so shady, but they are so flat in the book. Like, I thought they were flat in the movie, but whoever cast Woody Harrelson and Lenny Kravitz did a brilliant job, because they both have vibes and aesthetics where you could kind of lean into what little she gave us with those characters, and although they are still boring, they are somewhat likable in their own way. Whereas in the book, Hamish is just not likable at all. Like, I understand why he does what he does and why he is the way he is, but I still didn't like him. And Cinna, while I liked what he was doing and I thought that he was a very important character, he is so boring. Like, he is so dry. He is so monotone. I was super confused by that when I was listening to the audiobook. I thought at some point they would become more dynamic. Something. We would learn something. We would learn anything that would help us latch onto them a little bit. And it just never happened at all. Like, Woody Harrelson really saved that character in the movies. 1000%. So that's how I feel about the side characters in the Hunger Games. It's so opposite. And Red Rising, man, one of my favorite characters of all time is a side character in Red Rising. There are a lot more people to keep track of in the Red Rising series, for sure. It can get a little confusing to people in the later books. He does have an index of characters in the second and third Red Rising books, but in my opinion, I would rather have to take time, get certain names in my head, and have there be more and more interesting characters than be super bored anytime the main character's not talking. So while in Hunger Games, you have Hamish, who, like, I really can't say anything about, because what is there to say? And then so this is a character who's not even, like, super important in Red Rising. Like, he doesn't have as much time on the page as a lot of side characters, but he's like this gigantic, jolly man who could, like, shred anybody into pieces in a half a second, no problem. And he has a pet fox who is like his soulmate, and he feeds this fox jelly beans all the time because the fox is just obsessed with jelly beans. Okay, that is like one tiny side character from Red Rising. And there are so many different personality types and aesthetics and archetypes in Red Rising as far as the side characters go. There's a character for everybody in that book. That is one area where, for me, Red Rising just shoots so far above the Hunger Games, because it honestly confuses me. Like, did Suzanne Collins not... I just wonder if any of her proofreaders, like, said anything about the side characters. It just doesn't match up. The side characters don't match up to the level of talent she shows in the rest of her writing. It's hard to talk about the plot of these books without spoiling much. Hunger Games, I'm not that worried about spoiling. It's so popular, everybody kind of knows what happens anyways. Hunger Games is more, it's a societal norm that everybody knows about for every so many years. All these kids to go out and have to kill each other, right? That's Hunger Games. Red Rising is a story about classism and oppression. Well, it's about many things, but this is much more covert. This is about a society where they're trying to hide how messed things up, and Hunger Games is very openly, these are the things that we want you to do, and we're the rich people at the top, so we're gonna act like this is totally normal and totally fine, and you should just grin and go along with it. Whereas Red Rising. I can't even talk about it because it's like it's such a big. Oh, you know what? No. This is on the back of the book so I can actually tell you. Red Rising, basically the lowest caste of society, the Reds, live underground on Mars, and they are digging and drilling, and it's extremely deadly, that job. They think that they're preparing the planet for the rest of society to come and live safely. They think they're doing this noble thing. Darrow finds out that the higher castes have been living on the surface of Mars for years and years and years, a life of luxury, and they left the Reds underground as slaves that think they're not necessarily slaves. Basically, Darrow decides he wants to try to take down the Golds, the top caste, from the inside. And that is the story. That is how things get started with Red Rising. There is a part where, like, high school age kids are told to kill each other. Yes, that is a thing, but it's done in a very different way. I would say, in my opinion, the plot in Red Rising is a lot bigger in that it's a lot more layered. There are more people involved. Like, there are multiple planets involved. It's a freaking space opera. And there's a lot more layering of politics, and you get involved with politics from different sides, from different families, from different generations. Hunger Games is a more honed in, streamlined plot, in my opinion. Okay, I just want to read you the first line from each book to compare, because I think this is a stylistic difference. Pierce Brown seems to really go for like a good one-liner every now and then that's just going to hit you in the gut emotionally. He likes to be dramatic out of nowhere, which I enjoy. Whereas I think there are not that many great one-liners from Hunger Games, but I did cry. Listening to it. Like, she gets you emotionally in different ways. It's just, she more eases you into it, I feel like. So the first line from Hunger Games is, "When I wake up, the other side of the bed is cold." Okay? Not a bad opening line, but not one that's just like, oh my god, what happens next? Red Rising is, "The first thing you should know about me is I am my father's son." I don't know why that line really got me when I opened the book. Like, okay, you have my attention, sir. Go ahead. He has better lines than that, but they're all spoilers. I'm just saying, like, there's a stylistic difference in how they choose to get to you emotionally, how they choose to get your attention, how they choose to bring the drama, I guess. So I want to touch on the things that I do think they have in common, because while overall I do not understand why so many people compare these books, I mean, you can find overlapping themes in many books, and there are some here. Both of our protagonists really struggle with the morals of being at war or being in combat involuntarily, and kind of how you have to deal with defending yourself, defending the people you love, when you're trying to kill people who are not actually your enemy. Somebody else is telling you they're your enemy, but you don't feel that they're your enemy. So they both struggle with that a lot, both of our protagonists. They're both mourning a loved one. As I said, they lost them at different points in the story, and they lost different people in relation to them, but it's a thing that they go back to, both of them. They do both undergo a big transformation. Like, you can't really have either of these storylines and have your protagonist not change. It's different in the way they change, because one is more open about, like, Katniss is more open about what she's doing, and Darrow is doing everything undercover. So there are different things they have to deal with mentally, which is super interesting to look at. And neither of them wanted to be a hero, which I realize is a thing that can be said of a lot of heroes, because that's why they actually make good heroes. But neither of these two wanted to be leaders at all. Like, they had way simpler lives, and yes, they had it in them the whole time, but they would have been fine leaving that job to somebody else. So they do have that in common. And then, yeah, the main thing that I think everybody focuses on is some higher power telling young adults or children that they have to kill each other for some greater purpose. That's really the main thing that connects these two, but like I said, it's done in a different way and for a different reason, and most of the other parts of the story are not very similar. So those are the things that I do see in common. I don't get the same vibes from these books at all. I wouldn't have gone there in my head if nobody else had pointed it out. I like them both a lot. I liked Hunger Games a lot more than I thought, but this is a 5-star book for me. Hunger Games is 3.5 or 4. I would say 4 if it had good side characters. I probably would say 3.5 since they were such a tragedy. Like I said, I'm biased because I am obsessed with this book, but those are my thoughts. I get it, but I don't get it, basically. But if you've ever heard that comparison and you were wondering what it's about, that is it. If you've read both of them, please let me know your thoughts because I'm sure a million people will disagree with me. I've been meaning to do this one for a while, so it was about time. But they are both great books. If you haven't read either of them, you should definitely change that. They're both a lot of fun. Hunger Games is really chill to listen to an audiobook. If you try audiobook for Red Rising, do the dramatized version. There's a version that's narrated by one man, and he sounds about 40 years older than Darrow is in the book, which is going to change everything. So I highly recommend that you don't listen to that version, but read the book or listen to the other audiobook, and Hunger Games is great either way. Let me know what you think. See you guys next week.